Good evening, my friends. I hope this message finds you in a moment of stillness. Wherever you are tonight, maybe the city lights are fading, maybe only the hum of a distant street remains. I want you to listen closely, because what you're about to hear is not just a story of war or politics. It's the story of a nation that refused to disappear, a land where dust turned to fire and fire became faith. Far from Washington, far from Paris, far from the noise of foreign parliaments, there is a place where silence once ruled the horizon. A place called Burkina Faso. For years, its fields whispered the names of the lost villages burned, families vanished, soldiers buried under the red earth. The world looked away, but the people did not forget. And one morning, as dawn broke over the Sahel, the silence ended. At exactly 6:40 a.m., in a small village called Kana, the sky trembled. Birds scattered into a horizon painted in soft gold. Then came the roar, deep, unending, like the sky itself had been torn open. Fire fell, and in seconds, the earth that had suffered in silence for years finally answered back. That explosion was not chaos. It was a declaration that fear's time was over. For too long, the people of Burkina Faso had learned to live with ghosts, unseen enemies crossing borders at night, vanishing into forests by dawn. The air carried the sound of mourning more often than music. But that morning, something changed. Because behind that moment stood a man whose name was still unknown to most of the world, but whispered in every soldier's tent, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. He was not born into power. He did not inherit palaces or praise. He came from the same red dust as his men, a soldier first, a leader only because no one else would stand when the world had turned away. And when the first missiles fell, it was not just metal striking ground, it was conviction striking history. The message was clear. Burkina Faso would no longer bow. In the days that followed, the land began to move. Engines rumbled before dawn. Boots pressed into soil that had once soaked up only fear. From the hills of Kana to the dry plains near the Ivorian border, battalions moved like a single heartbeat. They were not waiting for orders from abroad. They were reclaiming their home. Reports came of insurgents slipping in from Côte d'Ivoire, men who thought the country still slept in confusion. But that time was gone. The 15th Battalion moved through the brush with silent precision, their traps set before the enemy even crossed the line. When the first shots rang out, the forest itself seemed to freeze. Within minutes, the chaos was over. The invaders lay disarmed, their paths burned behind them. Further north, between Dori and Tobarco, the 9th Battalion found another nestmen preparing a route for weapons and fuel. They never finished their plan. The firefight was brief, fierce, final. When it ended, the desert was still again, and the wind carried only one sound, the steady march of soldiers who no longer ran. It wasn't luck. It was leadership. Under Captain Traoré, the army had begun to breathe with one rhythm, clear intelligence, real-time coordination, and above all, belief. For the first time in years, they didn't fight just to survive. They fought to win. And slowly, the impossible began to happen. The people started to believe too. In the markets of Sino, mothers whispered of sons who smiled again. In the villages of Mani, farmers who once buried their rifles now stood guard beside their fields. Even the sound of distant gunfire no longer sent families fleeing. It sent them praying not for safety, but for victory. Because deep in the soil, something sacred was stirring. The enemy was no longer the hunter. The hunter was wearing the colors of Burkina Faso. Captain Traoré did not lead from behind walls. He walked the lines himself, mud on his boots, dust on his face. He spoke little, listened more. Defend your people, he told his men, but never again let fear defend itself. Those words spread faster than any bullet. They became a code, a promise, a creed. When the next alarm came, reports of infiltration near Sando and Seno, the troops moved before sunrise. They arrived before the enemy could even take position. By the time the light touched the savannah, the danger was gone. Captured fighters whispered in disbelief, "They were already waiting for us." It wasn't superstition. It was intelligence. It was discipline. It was a new nation awakening. From that moment, the rhythm of war changed. The insurgents who once slipped through shadows now found themselves running from them. Every camp discovered, every convoy destroyed, every rumor crushed before it became fear. Villagers began to call it the return, not just the return of the army, but the return of pride. And yet, the war wasn't only fought on the ground. It was fought in the sky. Drones began to hum across the horizon, silent, watchful, patient. From Gibo to Surgisuma, from Tia to Pegli, the eye in the sky never blinked. When the first missiles struck hidden camps under the forest canopy, the night lit up like day. Flames rose where once there had been secrecy. By morning, the jungle was smoke and silence. The so-called Fortress of Ghosts, a base said to be protected by superstition, vanished in 10 seconds. In Pegli, commanders gathered in what they thought was safety, but the sky disagreed. One drone, one sound, one flash. Then nothing. They learned that day that you can hide from men, but not from the heavens. Every strike carried a message. Burkina Faso does not forget. When insurgents gathered in the three border zone, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, thinking to launch their greatest assault, the drones watched from above. Hundreds of fighters beneath the trees, unaware that their last sunrise had already begun. Missiles fell like rain. Heat signatures turned into coordinates. By dawn, the forest burned. And when the smoke cleared, only silence remained. But that silence meant something new. It was not fear, it was deliverance. Across the villages, mothers pointed to the glowing sky and told their children, "That is our guardian now." Because what protected them wasn't luck, or foreign help, or empty promises. It was their own sons, their own courage, their own sky. And yet, the most remarkable moment came quietly. One afternoon, on the Eastern Front, soldiers saw a lone man walking toward them through the haze. He carried a rifle, but he held it to the sky, not to them. When he fell to his knees, they realized he was surrendering. A fighter, armed but broken. "I can't take it anymore," he said. Their airstrikes had destroyed their leaders, their food, their faith. He said, "We don't sleep. We don't know where the fire will fall next." For years, it was the people who lived like that. Now, fear had changed sides. Soon, more weapons were found abandoned. Camps left mid-meal. Trucks still running, drivers gone. The enemy had become the ghost. And the nation, for the first time in decades, was alive. Everywhere, hope began to rise like dawn. Mothers no longer cried when they heard explosions, they prayed because they knew it meant victory. Children waved at passing convoys, shouting the soldiers' names. Markets reopened. Schools refilled. Even laughter returned to the wind. At the center of it all stood Captain Traoré. He did not promise miracles. He promised action. Our greatest weapon, he said, is not what we carry, but what we believe. And that belief spread faster than gunfire. Before, soldiers fought to stay alive. Now they fought to live with honor. In towns like Sino and Mani, men formed local defense groups. Women cooked for the soldiers passing by. Farmers stood watch over their land. The people were no longer victims, they were defenders. And the army was no longer an institution, it was a family. Old men began to hang portraits of Captain Traoré beside those of Thomas Sankara. Sankara planted the seed, they said. Traoré makes it bloom in fire. It wasn't nostalgia. It was recognition that courage is a tradition and leadership is a duty. Even traders who had fled to Ivory Coast began to return. Teachers reopened classrooms. Markets buzzed again. Children ran through streets that had forgotten what laughter sounded like. The war had begun as survival. Now it was rebirth. And beyond Burkina Faso's borders, the world began to notice. Analysts in Washington called it dangerous. Editors in Paris called it reckless. But none of them could call it weak, because for the first time, a nation that had been treated as fragile was standing tall and alone. Traore had cut old chains and refused old dependencies. He invested not in aid, but in dignity. He believed freedom wasn't something given, it was something taken and kept. And for the first time in a generation, the people understood what independence truly meant. The story of Burkina Faso is no longer about survival. It is about sovereignty. And sovereignty, once awakened, does not sleep again. The smoke has thinned now. The battles have slowed. But across the red earth, soldiers still patrol the borders, silent and watchful. They know peace is fragile. They know the storm waits beyond the horizon. But they also know they are ready. Because from the ashes of forgotten villages has risen something the world cannot bomb or sanction: pride. The kind that grows from sacrifice. The kind that does not fade when the cameras turn away. And as the night settles over the savannah and the fires burn low, a whisper travels through the dust. We used to fear the dark. Now, the dark fears us. Burkina Faso stands, battered but unbroken. Its people remember every loss, every name, every dawn that came after the smoke. And at the heart of that memory burns one man's conviction that freedom must be built, not begged for. Captain Ibrahim Traoré has not just led a campaign. He has reminded a continent of its reflection. Thomas Sankara once spoke of Africa's dignity. Traoré has made it breathe again. The question now is not whether the world is watching. It is whether the world will understand. Because what began as a battle for land has become a struggle for meaning, the proof that a nation's worth is not measured in its wealth, but in its will. And so, my friends, as you listen tonight from wherever you are, from New York, from Delhi, from Lagos, remember this: when the sky burns over Burkina Faso, it is not destruction you are seeing, it is resurrection. And every ember that rises from that red dust carries a single message to the world. Africa does not ask for permission to stand tall, it simply stands.